one-size-fits-all communication fits no one. And that's the biggest problem that we have on this level in terms of selling the dream. Not only are we not talking about the dream, we're writing one letter for everybody. Because I read everybody's stewardship letter. You send the same stewardship letter to everybody, right? Because after all, we know this. What's important to an 18-year-old millennial is exactly the same thing that's important to an 81-year-old retiree, right? Of course not. So why do you think you're going to communicate effectively with the same message to all demographic constituencies? You cannot. Best example. The best people at communicating need and mission when it comes to soliciting things are academic institutions. Those of you that graduated from colleges or graduate schools know what I'm talking about because you're constantly being inundated. So it's a kind of a funny little exercise. About 1,000,000 years ago, I got a law degree from Emory University School of Law. At the same time, I got an MBA from the Goswell School of Business. And about 4.5 years ago, my youngest daughter got her acting bachelor's degree from Emory undergraduate. So within 1 month of her graduation from undergraduate, there were 3 different solicitations to the Mariana's household from Emory. One from law school, one from the business school, one from the undergraduate theater department. My question to you is, how similar or dissimilar do you think those solicitations were? And the answer is, because they're the best at it, they were completely different. Because after all, what's important to an old lawyer is unimportant to a starving actress. And what's really important to a starving actress may not be at all relevant to a business person. The point is, you cannot write a separate stewardship letter to every parishioner. It would be most effective if you could, but you can't. But here's what you can do. You can segregate your demographics of your parish and write a different letter to each demographic. So you write one letter to the young singles, focusing on the things that are important to them. A different one for the young marrieds, a different one for the young families, a different one to the empty nesters, and a different one to the retirees. In each case, focusing on the ministries, the service, the life-changing things that are relevant to them. You can actually do a much better job in your communications by targeting with greater precision your demographics. The second element is focusing on the team. People give to other people. Remember what we talked about in that whole module on it's personal, right? That one of the biggest predictors is who does the ask and what's your relationship with the person that does the ask. So the more you can connect people into the solicitation, the better off you're going to be. That's the reason why if you looked at the ministry model, the ministry books that I told you to create, I said list the name of the ministry leaders on it. Because sometimes their name will be the attraction that gets somebody to engage in participating in the ministry, right? And then the third one is selling the scheme, the integrity. It's all about integrity in everything you do. And we all know of examples, some of which are unfortunately contemporaneous around us, where there was a lack of integrity or a lack of transparency or a lack of accountability. And in 100% of the instances, there's an economic impact that results from that lack of integrity, transparency, and accountability. And it doesn't matter at what level, it doesn't matter what institution. I spent 6 years on the board of directors of the United Way. In 5 of the 6 years, our contributions went up. In 1 year, it went down. The year it went down, the national president of the United Way had some financial irregularities. It had nothing to do with the United Way of Atlanta. But some of the donors said, I don't know about that. And until we rebuilt that sense of trust and integrity, we were unable to reconnect with those donors at the level that we want. So you need to be thinking about how you do that, and I'll give you a couple of questions in a second. So here's the top 5 do's and don'ts. Do, share your vision and mission. Do, share success stories from your ministries. Do, ask for people's involvement and participation and their time. Do, explain how their contributions improve lives. And do, be positive, encouraging, and empowering of people. Make them feel great about what they're doing, not guilty for what they're not doing. Do not focus on financial difficulties or problems. I was working with one parish, and the head of they were doing a capital campaign, which was just asking about the money. And he sent me the copy of the letter, and he said, we've had a horrible result from this letter. And I read the letter, and this is essentially what it said. Almost verbatim, but it was a little bit more articulate. It said, your parish council has made a series of strategic mistakes. We spent way too much on the construction project. We had significant cost overruns. We failed to run an effective capital campaign, and we failed to rent the facilities out to cover the shortfall. Would you please consider making a contribution to make up the shortfall? And the guy looked at me with great sincerity and said, I can't understand why this isn't working. I said, well, let me translate to you in words that might understand. Here's what I just heard you say. We're a bunch of idiots. Give us some more of your money. He said, well, that's not what we meant. We wanted to be transparent. I said, yeah. There's an old wise man from Burgaw, North Carolina, who's my next door neighbor's father, who once said something very profound. He said, you should always tell the truth, But you don't always need to be telling them, right? So there's a point in time in which integrity and transparency is important. But when you're trying to inspire people to motivate their behavior, telling them about all your failures is not the best time to do that. Schedule a time for confession. Talk to your best friends, your country, your audience. Okay. Number 2, don't use negative messages. You'll motivate behavior once, and then you'll break integrity. I can motivate your behavior by creating a false crisis, and that's the last thing you're going to ever believe that I ever tell you. Number 3, don't use the same message for every type of steward. Don't merely talk about money. Notice I didn't say don't ever talk about money. I just said don't merely talk about money. And finally, don't just use mail and email. All right, so point number 10 is developing processes, systems to regularly and publicly communicate your stewardship message with integrity, accountability, transparency, and present all the stewardship financial information. I mean, one of the things I talk about with parishes all the time, you know, I go to a parish and say, oh, we're very transparent. Great. Let's go to your website. Let me see if I can see your financial statements. Oh, we haven't put our financial statements. Well, you're not transparent then. I mean, you want transparency? That's transparency. I mean, you know, when we first started, when our beloved Metropolis first came to the Metropolis, there were some people that had some concerns about what was going on. And so he said, what should we do? And we said, let's put our financial statements on the website. So we did. We put our financial statements on the website. The first couple of parishes we go to, it's like, there's hanky-panky going on. I said, well, let's go to the website and look at the financials. And they said, wait, the financials on the website? I said, yeah. Oh, okay, well, must be okay then. You know, it's kind of like there's this whole notion of what happens when we're transparent and we're open and we're visible about these kinds of things. I mean, all right, let's talk about stewardship and capital campaigns, because again, this is something we get wrong frequently in our churches. The first thing is we have to have a regular stewardship campaign schedule that's repeated every year. So it's a regular schedule, it's repeated every year, it's not a one-and-done communication in September. There should be at least quarterly homilies on stewardship. At least quarterly homilies on stewardship. And if your clergyman is uncomfortable with that, he should engage the services of a layperson to offer a stewardship homily with regard to that. And I will tell you that, not to take anything away from the credibility of the clergy, because it's essential, but there's a little added dimension that comes in when a layperson comes up and tells their story. So it's clergy plus personal testimonials. Shouldn't be focused just on financial needs, but on life-changing ministries. People give to mission and vision. Emphasize time and talents. Mention cases where treasures can be given. In other words, easy ways for people to give of their payments and their treasures they can do, so it's not a hard exercise for them, right? Emphasize tithing and percentage giving in each message. No matter how you do it, find a way to wind in tithing and percentage giving as a message. You establish that as the goal. You just establish it as the goal. Explain life-changing ministries and services that are being offered if everyone tithes. And then the second dimension there are monthly stewardship articles in the parish publications. Now, this is where we sit there and we write the budget report and think that's going to inspire anybody. That's not the kind of stewardship message I'm talking about. I'm talking about really effective stewardship messaging. So I'm starting to try and assemble some items. On my website, I have about 5 or 6 articles that you're free to take and use, adapt, modify, no credits required, etc. I'm getting resources from other people that are doing the same thing so that we can share them with each other, right? So that your parish hasn't seen the one over there, but if they got a good message, we ought to share them all together. But there's nothing really more powerful than having a real short, not a long epistle, not, let me tell you, the 15 messages from this gospel passage, but we apply it in your life, okay? Campaigns. You have to have a very specific campaign month. So your campaign is a year-long campaign. Right? What did I say? Quarterly homilies, regular testimonials, monthly messaging, leading up to an official campaign where we're going to do the in-home visits, Plan A, woohoo for Plan A, right? Or the group visits in-home, Plan B, or if you're too lazy and you don't really want great results, Plan C, the personal telephone calls. That's the campaign month. It's usually in the September to November time frame. And again, there's your Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Please go with Plan A, the personal visit. We covered that in great detail. Provide an easy process to deliver the stewardship commitments. In other words, the solicitors don't get to see what the person fills out. They go to a central, secure repository, but it's got to be easy. It's got to be simple. It's got to be a mail slot, a mail direction, a secure place where they can put it in there, okay? You ought to tie in ministry information and recruitment events around the cycle, right? So what do I mean by that? If you've established a council of ministries, your stewardship month is the time to have your ministry fair, where you have an event at your parish where every one of the ministries has a table, and they're all talking about the work that they're doing in their ministries. Because what are we recruiting people for? To engage in ministries, to engage in the services to the church, right? And then you need to personally follow up with any steward who does not recommit. Everybody gets contacted. If they don't recommit, they get contacted. If they move, you can answer that question. If they died, I hope you were there for the memorial service, right? If they've gotten ticked off, you need to find out why. You need to see if we can fix it. If not, you need to connect them with another Orthodox parish, because maybe, for whatever reason, it ain't going to work in yours, and that's regrettable, but it's okay. Just keep them in the faith. And then you need to celebrate success. You want to do a measurement thing? I'll give you a thermometer to put up. It's not a thermometer of how much money you raised. It's a thermometer of how many lives you changed, how many people's trajectories you improved, how many meals you've served, how many houses you've built, how many individuals have gone through one of the ministries that you've done. Now that's something to celebrate. That's a metric that you can start to look at. That's a metric that's going to connect up the dots with people. The monetary thermometers are fine, but they're just not inspiring. So one little quick digression here, because this is something that we oftentimes get wrong. The difference between a stewardship campaign and a capital campaign, right? So there's some similarities and there's some differences. So here are the similarities. Both of them require laying integrity, accountability, and transparency. Both of them should focus on the mission and vision of abundance and what you're trying to accomplish with the ministries of the parish, not focused on negative messaging. Both of them should have a schedule, a beginning and an end. And we're going to talk about one big difference where that's a little bit different. They should reach out to every parishioner. It's not anybody gets a pass on this one. They both will get better results if they include personal solicitations, testimonials. The mob is wrong. It's all personal. You solicit somebody in person, different results. Both need a dedicated team. Both need really good materials. Both require repeated and personal thanking. Repeated and personal thanking. So, capital campaign, annual stewardship campaign, the same. But here are the big differences between the two. In a capital campaign, it's all about the money. It's just about the money. Now, of course, I've said it's about the money to do something that's related to mission and vision, but I'm not engaging anybody's time and talents in a capital campaign. I'm asking them to make a contribution for some capital asset over a period of time. Whereas in stewardship campaigns, yes, there's a money component, but I'm equally, if not more, focused on their time and their talents, right? So there's one big ingredient that's unique to capital campaigns that's different from stewardship campaigns. In the capital campaigns, they have a beginning and the end because you have a set objective. You meet that objective, you're done. The beginning and the end in the stewardship campaign is every January it begins, or September it begins, and every 12 months later it ends, and then it starts all over again. So there's a beginning and an end because there's a cycle, whatever 12-month cycle you're on, but it starts again anew in an annual campaign, if you will, a stewardship campaign. That's different than a capital campaign. Once you're done funding, you're one and done. Capital campaigns usually begin with a feasibility study to ascertain how much you can reasonably expect to raise. That's not a feature at all of a stewardship campaign. And then perhaps one of the biggest differences in a capital campaign, it usually begins with what we call a quiet phase. It's where a few people go, it's the 80-22, Pareto got it right? So 20% of the people give 80% of the money. So in a capital campaign, you identify who your big donors are, you quietly go one-on-one and solicit them before you announce the campaign starts. You should have, at the end of the process, about 80% of your money committed. Then you formally announce your capital campaign, and you go to the rest of the 80% of the people, because remember, we're going to get 100% of people, who will give you the remaining 20% of the funds. That's very different in a stewardship campaign. There is no 80-20 rule. There is no quiet phase. We're going to everybody at the same time, all in. So, step number 11, establishing a year-long stewardship schedule and campaign with extensive messaging, very extensive messaging, in many places and in many different voices. It cannot be just the priest once a month, once a quarter, once a year. It cannot just be the stewardship chair once a quarter, once a year, once a month. It's got to be a lot of voices with a lot of people all sharing their stories and all engaging in their experiences. That will make a fundamental difference. Okay, number 12. This will be a shocker to most Orthodox parishes because I don't think I've seen this in virtually any of the Orthodox parishes, the hundreds that I've worked with. There's a few that have done it, okay? It's what we call estate giving or plan giving. Some of you are familiar with this. It's one of the greatest opportunities for financial security for a parish is establishing a plan giving program. So let's define some terms. First of all, the vast majority of people, this is in a nationwide survey in America, about 67% of them have no idea what plan giving means, right? So we have a clear definitional problem right out of the box, that 2/3 of the people don't even know what we're talking about when we're talking about it. So what is plan giving? Plan giving is a process for making a significant contribution of a charitable nature during the donor's life or at their death. It could be either or, right? So a planned gift can happen while you're alive, or it can happen in your will, in your estate plan. Either one of them is fine. They're both part of the exercise in that regard. And we sat through a Metropolis Council meeting yesterday where we were talking about how can you, for example, convert a life insurance policy into something that can be given as a charitable gift even while you're alive, right? Or we talk about how you can include a donation to whatever charity you want in your will or in your estate plan. The last part is the number one reason, this one was really astounding to me, the number one reason why donors include a particular charity in their will is because they were asked. They did nationwide surveys of people that include a charity in their will, and they said, why? And it wasn't the reason that everybody thought, oh, it appealed to them. Well, of course it appealed to them, otherwise they wouldn't have given it, right? Number one reason is because they asked them. Why didn't you give it to them that you really are loving passionate about? They didn't ask you, right? So how many times have you asked your parishioners to include your parish or your ministry in their will? Don't answer, I'm going to answer it. Okay. Naming the church as a beneficiary of a life insurance policy is an easy way to give, and by the way, simultaneously get a tax deduction. So if you buy a life insurance policy on yourself, where the church, and I'm not getting into the tax and legal side of this, there's a way to do this, where the church is the absolute beneficiary of it, ultimately the church is going to get the benefit when you die, and you get a tax deduction for the amount of the contribution. So there's a lot of creative ways you can do this. But plan giving education is really a part of an appeal and part of something you ought to do. So part of what you need to be thinking about is there are people in every community that specialize in this area that will come to talk to your parishioners for free. And there may be a fee for if you use them to do a service, but they'll always talk to you for free because they're always out there trying to pitch this kind of thing. But you need to have a regular messaging around plan giving. Many of the state planners, I said, will offer it for free. If you want a resource, here is a fully free resource that we developed at the Archdiocese level. There's you can look at it at the GoArch site. It's called the Eternal Light Society, but that was just one name we put on it. You can call it whatever you want to. It is a whole set of materials already pre-baked that you can download, and if you want to adjust them, you can adjust them to establish the plan giving ministry in your parish. Let me just give you an example of how important this is. I wish I could give you an Orthodox example. But instead, I'm going to give you an Episcopal example with one of the parishes that I helped through their stewardship program. They were way ahead of us on this one. They actually had a plan giving program. Now, they called theirs the Good Shepherd Society. And the only thing that was required to be a member of the Good Shepherd Society is you had included their church in your will. That's it. You just signed, I've included the church in the will. You didn't have to give them the will. They didn't have to know how much you were giving. You were a member of the Good Shepherd Society. So what does it mean to be a member of the Good Shepherd Society? Well, once a quarter, they had a cocktail party for all the members of the Good Shepherd Society. And they just got together and they socialized and they talked about how much had come into the endowment as a result of prior Good Shepherd Society donors, who were some of the more recent people who had passed on and given money and stuff like that. And what did they do with the money? So they were celebrating this culture of generosity, this culture of abundance, the fact that they were all part and parcel, and they were celebrating the people who had done it before them and all the extraordinary things they did. Here's the interesting part of the story. That parish has an endowment of, last I checked, and this is more than 5 years ago, so I know it's grown since then, over $7.1 million. And they still had 223 members of the Good Shepherd Society. All of whom were going to die, and all of them have included the parish in their will. So that's why I said I need to go back and find out and update my numbers to see what it's grown to since then. And so the point here is, you need to develop and implement a planned estate giving process, program, into your church. And it may not help you in the short run, but it will fundamentally transform your parish's trajectory and its safety and security in the future in that regard. I was sharing a story at one of the breaks over here. There was a one senior citizen in our community who, was a real humble restaurateur, and nobody suspected that he had any money, and nobody had approached him, and at the end of the day, the man died by the grace of God. He included the church in the will, and the gift was over $1 million. And we didn't even know he had $1 million, let alone that he was going to give $1 million to the church. And so this is an example of this is not one of those examples of where we're trying to twist anybody's arm or trying to put any arm. This is not about convincing people to do something they otherwise can't afford to do or shouldn't do. Okay? It is to suggest, though, that everybody else is approaching them. I can't tell you how many times I've been approached by my college, my 2 graduate schools, my kids' colleges and graduate schools, and various other charities that I'm associated with. And the church doesn't have a seat at that table that it should. So now we talk about transparency and accountability. Now I mentioned transparency and accountability in the communications, but this is so critically important, it merits its own point on the spectrum here. You will not have a successful stewardship ministry or a successful ministry program unless you have complete transparency and accountability. So let me give you the science behind it from various different sources. I'm going to give you 5 or 6 different message points. Each of the sources is listed at the bottom. Okay. So first of all, transparency and accountability has been proven to increase generosity. Here's the quote. A significant increase in the public transparency, accountability, and institutionalized credibility of many religious and charitable causes and organizations to which American Christians might consider giving money would have the real effect over time of considerably increasing the amount of money they give. So what they were able to do in their studies is determine how do we assess transparency and accountability in our communication, and what has been the effect on generosity, and going back and saying, how were you impacted by this? And we're seeing great impact. Here's the second point to remember. Parishioners want more transparency and accountability. You know, we asked the question, this is a quote from a different research study. We asked the question in a number of different ways, and each time the answer came out the same. Parishioners want more say in how their parishes are run. In parish financial matters, they expect accountability and transparency. Overwhelmingly, what they said is, we want to be sure that what we're doing, what we're investing in makes sense, is worthwhile. Next point I want to do is talk about how transparency and accountability reduces opportunities for financial irregularities. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis once put it best in one of his opinions. He said, sunlight is said to be the best disinfectant. Electric light, the most efficient policeman. If everything you do is laid out there for everyone to see in every detail, the opportunities to be duplicitous and have less integrity is reduced. Next one. Absence does not make the heart grow fonder. So in today's American society, where transparency and accountability have become the expectation, it's the norm, it's what we expect. In fact, when we don't see it, we're ready to march against it and things of that nature. It raises the presumptions of impropriety. Even if nothing is wrong, if there appears to be some transparency issue, people are skeptical, people are doubtful. The last point on this one is productive conversations about money become easier. If you have been fully transparent, if you have laid everything to bear, if you've shown everybody your financial statements, it's a whole lot easier to have a conversation about the money aspect of the issue. If you've been very open in saying, here's what we've generated, here's what we've done with what you generated, here's what we're short in order to do what we want to do, and it's all laid out there for you to see, well, now we can have an easier conversation. We're actually talking about the money aspect of it. So a parish should regularly, repeatedly, and openly provide all its financial information and steward information to all its stewards. Now, not how much Costa gave, not how much Maria contributed, not how much time they spent. That's subject to personal testimonials if they want to do it. But there should be nothing hidden from the parishioners associated with any of the financial elements, including the number of stewards and demographics. And so the results of your annual audits of your parish's financial records should be shared. Now here's the first right? Because the vast majority of parishes don't do annual audits. And I understand there's a cost associated with that, but you should do some form of an audit. You should have some real audit types, if not auditors, actually audit all the books and records and make a public report. And by audit types, I don't mean, Costa, who ran the cash register at his Greek restaurant. I'm sure he's very good with financial matters. My grandfathers, my father, they were all that foreign. I'm talking about somebody that has credentials in auditing, and they should share the public results associated with that. And you should consider, as I said before, the transparency of putting your financial statements and all your information on your website. Now, some people are a little bit concerned about if they put it out there, might it engage criminal activities and whatnot. And I mean, we can conspire all kinds of theories, but if you want to then create a secure spot in your website for all your parishioners to sign in with the login information, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but some people do. There's a great group of materials that we've generated. Again, this is Metropolis of Atlanta. It's on our website. It's also on our portal. It's a program on good financial practices. And I heartily recommend that everybody in your leadership and anybody in any financial part of your parish should review these materials. We're going to try to offer this on an annual basis. Chris Mandelaris is a former partner at Ernst & Young, who ran the PCOAB in Washington, was the one that put this together with a lot of resources from a lot of other people. It's a great thing on good financial practices. All right, so now we're going to come to step 14. And we're going to believe this is step 14 because I think this is going to be one of the most transformational things that we're going to do within the Orthodox Church if we actually start to engage in this process. And it was referred to as small groups. Some people who are used to seeing in various different Protestant evangelical churches have seen the power of small group ministry. We're actually seeing it in a lot of different contexts in mainstream ministry. So let's talk a little bit about what a small group is. A small group is about up to 10 people, should be more than 10 people, who meet weekly at homes to do two things: explore some theological, spiritual topics, and really engage in personal life issues. So this is a group of people that gather together on a weekly basis at a home to just engage in some dialogue about spiritual issues and personal life issues. An easy way to get started this is to have a short conversation about that week's scripture passages or some spiritual message from the priest. I mean, in churches that really do a great job with small groups, they'll put together 3 talking points and they'll just circulate it around. And just people having a conversation to talk about it and whatnot, okay? But you also need to reserve time to deal with what life is dealing them. This is not just a Bible study. This is creating a personal network of about 10 folks that are comfortable with each other enough to share their respective spiritual journeys, including where they're falling short. They won't do that in front of their priest. Including where they're having issues, and to talk about what's going on in their lives, and actually be there for each other. When they look at the power of small groups, what I find that's really fascinating to me is it's actually orthodox in its foundation, but it's the non-orthodox churches that actually have proven its validity. Let me prove it to you, right? So in Matthew 18:20, for where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I will be with them all. So it's not just 2 or 3 as long as there's a clergyman or hierarch, right? When 2 or 3 are gathered together, the Lord's going to be with us. And then even further in Hebrews 10:24-25, I love this one. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another. In other words, this is not supposed to be just an exercise where we walk in for an hour and a half or 2 on Sunday and then that's the end of our religious experience. There's actually a responsibility to meet with one another and to encourage with one another and to be with one another. There's a phenomenal organization. It's called Small Group Resources, and they have a website, smallgroupresources.net. So any person that's interested in starting a small group ministry, I recommend you take a look at this, and I have a whole list of other resources I'm going to share with you. Now, some of these are of a different denominational faith, so you may have to make some adjustments to make an Orthodox version of it, but it's not a long reach. But here's what they concluded at Small Group Resources as the 10 biggest benefits of a small group ministry. They said life change happens best in small groups. And if you think about it, you think about what's happening in your life. If you have a life-changing event, you don't stand up in front of the church and say, let me tell you what happened in my life. You know, it's usually kind of a small group thing. Small groups make churches personal. In other words, not just like some institutional thing where I go to and I'm one of the 10, 50, 100, 10, 100 kind of thing. There's actually a personal relationship there. Thirdly, small groups provide a nearly, listen to this, unlimited leadership development pipeline. Because everybody that's leading a small group ministry is ultimately in the pipeline of learning how to gather people together and achieve something with it and to grow and to build missions and programs and ministry and activity. So it's a pipeline for leadership development. Thirdly, off-campus small groups provide nearly unlimited space at optimum times. So think about this for a second. Remember I talked about in the 1950s we tended to live closer to our churches? Now we live all over the place. And our churches sometimes are limited by physical constraints of how big they are, how many resources they can have. Well, what if I can tell you that you have unlimited resources? It's just in the houses of your parishioners. So if we're now having small group gatherings at people's houses every week, our real estate portfolio just increased exponentially. I like this one. Come over to my house is much easier invitation than come with me to church. Right? How many times have we invited people to our houses compared to how many times we've invited people to church? I mean, just do the math in your own head. Number 6, small groups provide the best opportunity for one another. Now, that's a cute little phrase, right? It's being there for one another. I'm there for you. You're there for me. I feel that sense of connection. It's harder to do it in a big organization, even if it's a church of 70 families, than it is in a small group of 10 people. Number 7, small groups can provide a sense of family for many whose biological families live far away. Now this is kind of an interesting dynamic, particularly as you see younger kids, and by that I mean millennial age and teenage and 20s and 30s, who don't live near their family. Conversely, families whose are empty nesters, whose kids are in different places, and ultimately even senior citizens who may not live near their kids. So it's creating another neural family network for them of a close and intimate nature when their own biological family is not nearby. Number 8, I can ask questions in a small group. How many of you have ever sat in a church service or a Bible study or something like that and just wanted to raise your hand and say, wait, I didn't understand that, or why are we doing that? But you'd never do that in a big group, right? But it's a lot easier in a group of 10 people with whom you've developed an intimate relationship. Say, I just didn't understand what Father said this Sunday. Can anybody help me with this one? And you wouldn't even say that to Father, right? Or whatever the case may be, right? Number 9, small groups make it possible for more people to be cared for between Sundays, right? So if you look at it, there was a sociologist who postulated that nobody can have, that's something you're familiar with Dunbar's rule, is what it's referred to, that nobody can have more than 150 close relationships, where you know enough about them and they know enough about you that you feel connected. So put that in the context of a priest, right? So even if there were 150 families, the average Christian family unit in America has 2.6 people that live in it, right? So now we're talking about 400 individuals, and we're asking the priest to have a personal relationship with them? That's an impossibility. And that's not a small community. Imagine a larger community, right? So how do we create this connection other than just on Sunday? This doesn't replace the priest by any means, but it actually is supporting many things. And the 10th thing is, small groups provide an ever-expanding network for communications and impact.